Hey guys, I'm the Drink Pro. Does age really matter? We're going to find out today with two Willett bourbons. Hey everybody, I'm the Drink Pro. Thanks so much for joining me. Please continue liking, subscribing, sharing the videos. Anything you can do to support my content is greatly appreciated. I've got a couple of really interesting Willett pours to drink today. Once again, you can tell I'm at the farm.
We're at the farm? I tell you what, this place is fucking crazy.
Andrew Kurz has been kind enough to provide me with these two wonderful bottles. This is the Willett 15-year bourbon. It's barrel number 3633, 58.7% alcohol. On the other end of the spectrum, I have this Willett 80th anniversary. Now this bottle comes in this nice cardboard tube, and the front label is very different from the standard Willett bottles. But it's just a 4-year bourbon. It doesn't have a barrel number, and it's 50% alcohol. So it's quite a different pour from the 15-year Willett. That's a higher proof, older age. We're going to see how they compare side by side today. So I think I'm going to pour the young one first, but I'm going to do them both right side by side, so not too worried about it. Now I'll pour this 15-year.
I think that one has an 8.
Oh, this was an 8? So these Willett bottles can be hard to find information on if you buy them years later in the future. We're not sure exactly what year this product was made, but we suspect it was from 2008 because there's a 08 on the bottom of the bottle. And for 2008, with 15 years of age, you know it's been around for quite some time. Now, when you look at these two pours, the 15 certainly is darker than the 4. And notably, it's a lot more oily as well, which I kind of like. The 4-year-old definitely looks good. It's definitely got a good oil content, especially for something that's only 4 years old. But you can really see the age on the 15. So let's taste them and see what we think. Oh wait, that's not how I do this. Forget my process. Okay. I got too excited. I just wanted to drink it right away. So now that we've looked at it, and I started to drink it because I forgot what I was doing and got really excited, let's smell. It's got, this definitely reminds me of some of the more recent products I've had from Willett, like the 6-year bourbon I reviewed. It's got this bright herbal quality. It's very sweet on the nose, but it's a high tinny sweetness, very much like the corn sweetness you'd expect from some of the younger bourbons out there. I will say I think this is a lot more well balanced than the recent 6-year I tried. Very mild shifts between this sweetness and this slight herbal note, and maybe even a slight woodiness, but it's very slight. I'm still getting sort of like a burnt sugar, but it's a little bit richer of a burntness than a caramel. A lot of times a caramel is sort of a certain level of crystallization. This almost goes beyond that into a burnt quality. Not necessarily in a bad way, though. It's sort of like this combination of a very subtle barrel char mixing in with that sugar sweetness. And I'm picking up some of the grain on this, and that's always, to me, very indicative of a younger Willett product. Now that I've had 3 or 4 of them, I really think the younger Willetts, the grain comes to the forefront. That's very common with younger bourbons in general, but there's something about the way the Willett mash bill presents. Even when I tried the Noah's Mill product, which is a combination of 20-year and 4-year bourbon, the 4-year brightness kind of shone through, and you could see there was some young whiskey in it. And there's not to say there's anything wrong with that. I mean, young whiskey can be fantastic. It's interesting, it's bright, it's fresh, it's rich. Different things in a whiskey will appeal to different people. And so I'm always hesitant to say, oh, I don't like younger whiskey, because I know I've had wonderful young whiskeys. It's about what characteristics you look for in the pour. Let's compare the nose now to this 15-year. Totally different nose. So first off, all of that brightness is gone. There's something herbal that's a very consistent note to me in the Willett products. I'm not sure if it's eucalyptus or if it's mint, or if it's some other sort of herbal spice that you might use, like a sage. But there's a very consistent herbal quality for me that shows up between these two pours, and it's the only thing that's consistent. Where at this pour, I get the sweet, bright corn, almost a citrusy note, and then that lightly burnt sugar. If I go to the 15-year, the woodiness becomes a lot richer. It's almost a peanut. It's such a deep, rich, sweet, woody quality. In that regard, it kind of reminds me of a very old St. Nick that I tried, the 17-year. It has this real sweetness, this rich, earthy quality combined together in a way that's really beautiful. But that herbal quality comes through in the Willett that you don't see in that very old St. Nick. This is Definitely a Willett product. If you smell it, you would know. I'm definitely getting some honey notes on this. I don't get that sharp corn sweetness. The sweetness here is a lot more refined and subtle, but it's still very gentle. So the 15-year Willett is almost certainly a source product. At the time that they were releasing these products, I think I said it was like 2008, 2009, they didn't have any distillate that was old enough to have been a 15-year release. And Willett sort of built their name on sourcing whiskey, which is why I find it interesting that the profiles are so similar. I suspect that this is a function of the palate of the buyers for Willett. Whoever was picking out these barrels for them to release very likely was looking for a specific kind of profile. And so when they found that profile, it would go into the product they released because it reminded them of what they were looking for. You can sort of self-select a very specific profile, even amongst radically different distilleries, if you have a consistent preference that you bring to the forefront and that you bring to your tasting events. As I let this sit, this younger whiskey becomes more and more bright. The corn really starts to show up. The young sweetness shows up. I'm starting to get a lot more baking spice out of this older one. Maybe a hint of nutmeg, definitely some cinnamon, definitely some brown sugar. Certainly it's a more complex pour in terms of the evolution of the nose. I think the nose is more complex just with one whiff on the 80th anniversary. But this 15-year, you keep coming back and keep finding new things. So without further ado, let's give them a taste. It's a very classic 4-year Willett product. The sweetness is kind of this soft grain sweetness. It hasn't really evolved into anything like caramel or honey. There's a definite grain dry note, almost like a rye note, but I don't think it's really actually rye. I suppose it could be. It could be a high rye mash bill. I'm not certain, but you get this interesting bitter note in the mid palate. It's a very herbal bitterness, but then it fades away very quickly and leaves you with this soft, sweet, gentle wood. It reminds me a lot, actually, of the Noah's Mill, which I think adds credence to the claim that the Noah's Mill is a combination of 4-year and 20-year. This gives me a lot of the same notes as the Noah's Mill. Yeah, there's a definite mintiness, I would say, in the mid palate of this. You get a little bit of the herbal spice, a little bit of mint, and it evolves into this, like I said, the soft, sweet wood. It hasn't changed a lot over time as I've been drinking it. It's pretty consistent once you get used to the palate progression in this one. All right, let's try the 15-year. Went down the wrong pipe. Pro tip, you're not supposed to breathe whiskey. It's good. Okay. All right, without further ado, let's try the 15-year. So the proof really shows up. Compared to that 100 proof, it's not that big of an increase. You know, we're going from 50% alcohol to 58.7%, so it's not that big of an increase, but it's hit so much stronger. I think all that woodiness really comes to the forefront. You get this wave of interesting spice and barrel tannins and woodiness and earthiness. There's a lot happening in this pour. And then when I go back to the nose, I start to pull out really interesting sweet notes that didn't really show up earlier. I almost get some fruity notes on the nose after tasting it. It's really interesting because the initial flavor is not sweet, but it reminds you of sweetness. It's like there could be sweetness in there somewhere, but it's not actually sweet. You get this interesting, like almost red hot cinnamon kind of flavor with a lot of bitterness in the middle. Then you get this sort of raw cinnamon bitterness moving into this interesting soft wood flavor with subtle barrel char and some of that almost like a geranium floral note. Really, really interesting stuff. Yeah, and going back to the nose, that geranium's really starting to pop. There's definitely a floral note that you'd only pick up after coming back to it again and again. Oh man. I think there's actually like a walnut quality on the mid palate of this. It's really subtle, but it started to show up. And it compares really well with the sweetness. You get sort of this soft creme brulee, very, very subtle burnt sugar sweetness. It's more caramel than creme brulee because it's a little bit less creamy, but you definitely get this burnt sugar sweetness. But then it's juxtaposed with this nuttiness that's subtle and earthy and almost bitter. It doesn't taste like a sweet nut. It's not a cashew. It's not an almond. It's got like a walnut quality. And then this wonderful slight peppery note and woody note on the finish. It keeps changing so much. It evolves so much in your palate. And every time I go back to a sip, it's a new adventure. You know, the 15-year has so many different flavors and changes so much throughout the palate. It really, to me, highlights what happens when you have whiskey spend a lot more time in a barrel. Now, obviously, one of these is sourced, probably not the other one. But you have a very interesting but singular palate experience with the 4-year whiskey. Whereas the 15-year whiskey, it keeps changing and evolving, and every sip becomes something new. The initial sip is not as complex, but it keeps changing over and over as you sip it and experience it. You can really sit with the pour. And the flavors are much wider and richer and longer. The brightness of the new make is completely gone, whereas hints of it remain in the 4-year whiskey. I'm starting to get like a cooked pears note on this 15. There's just so much happening. You can keep finding new flavors all over the place. The consistent flavor, though, is that oakiness. The oak is persistent throughout all of the different iterations of flavor I'm finding. I'm always getting some sort of sweetness, sometimes citrus, sometimes fruit, but always sweet. And then it moves into this more mid-palate herbal nuttiness. And then the finish brings the wood, and then it goes back to one of the other previous flavors, back to the wood, back to a previous flavor, back to the wood. And you get this sort of oscillation on the palate for a long time after drinking it. It really is spectacular. I'm going to go enjoy this Willett for a quiet moment, and you all keep drinking like professionals. Cheers.